and welcome to another episode of Sofa Sessions. My name's Marcia and I'm joined today by my colleague Sam, and we're going to be having a conversation about the duty to make reasonable adjustments under the Equality Act 2010, an area that is fundamental to HR professionals and employers alike. Sam, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Marcia.
This is a topic that comes up again from time and time again. For HR teams especially, it's really important to have these conversations. So I think it's fantastic that we get a chance to just have a bit of a deep dive and explore things in a bit more detail.
Yeah.
So to start us off, Sam, could you just briefly explain what we mean when we say reasonable adjustments, and when does that duty exactly arise?
Of course, yeah. So back to basics, the duty to make reasonable adjustments is contained in sections 20 and 21 of the Equality Act 2010. And really, it's a cornerstone of disability protection. And its purpose is to ensure that disabled employees and job applicants are not placed at a substantial disadvantage compared to non-disabled employees and job applicants. So the duty arises where an employer knows or ought reasonably to know that an individual has a disability and they are experiencing that disadvantage. So importantly, it's a proactive duty, and that's quite unique for employers, but it does mean that employers should be thinking about considering adjustments, even where an employee hasn't made a formal request for the same. Now, there's three main triggers for the duty. The first is a provision, a criteria on a practice, what we call a PCP, something an employer does, that is applied by the employer. It might be a physical feature of the building, for example, something as simple as steps leading up to a door, or the need for an auxiliary aid. And understanding those triggers really is the starting point for helping HR professionals understand when action is required.
And can I just touch on that substantial disadvantage that you mentioned? That doesn't mean something drastic, does it?
Exactly, and it just means something more than trivial. The threshold is relatively low, so employers should really take a broad and supportive approach when considering potential disadvantages for disabled people.
Thank you, that's really insightful, Sam. And what would you say are some of the most common reasonable adjustments that HR professionals are likely to encounter?
So most adjustments really relate to working arrangements, or that's certainly a very common one. For example, flexible hours, reduced hours, hybrid working, we're seeing a lot more of after COVID, even a phased return after a long sickness absence. But employers may also need to think about modifying processes. So whether that's a sickness absence trigger points, a number of days absence, they might want to think about adjusting them so that disability related absences don't feel overly important in those processes. But other examples might include specialist equipment. Now, they'll obviously be very specific, but specialist equipment or software, offering additional training for people. And this is one we certainly see a lot of, and that's allowing additional support and additional time in formal processes. So things like attending formal grievance meetings or disciplinary meetings. But an area, and we are going to talk about this a little bit later, and that's more of an interesting and more relevant area post the case that we're going to talk about, is redeployment. And that looks at if an employee can no longer do their substantive role because of their disability, an employer considering actually could they be better placed somewhere else in the business instead of jumping to termination ultimately. But the Equality and Human Rights Commission has got some fantastic guidance about practical considerations, and we can link to that as well.
Thanks, Sam. And that leads us quite nicely into the high profile case that you just mentioned that we're going to have a look at. And we know that it's attracted quite a lot of attention. So could you just tell us a bit about the significance in Miller and Rentokil Initial UK Limited?
Absolutely. So this is a 2024 appeal tribunal claim. And it has got important implications because it deals with long-term sickness absence and redeployment, which again is something we are seeing more of. And in this case, the employee had multiple sclerosis and effectively couldn't do their quite physically demanding job. And so he applied for an alternative position in the company in a more administrative position. The company weren't sure whether he would be equipped to do that because there was a bit of a skills gap. He'd been doing a physical role and he was looking to do the administrative role. And they decided ultimately that he wouldn't be suitably skilled for that role. And ultimately he was dismissed in his substantive position. Now, both the Employment Tribunal and the Appeal Tribunal concluded that the employer had failed to make reasonable adjustments by giving him additional support in moving into the administrative role. So that could have looked like additional training, additional time in a probation period, for example. But ultimately, the key takeaway is that reasonable adjustments are not just a new chair for someone with a bad back. They might actually be about going above and beyond to address some of those substantial disadvantages. And that might include taking a leap of faith on someone and providing additional training to redeploy them in the business if their current role is no longer suitable.
No, that's great. And so taking that into consideration, would you say that employers need to take, would you say, more of a flexible and open-minded approach when it comes to redeployment?
Absolutely. And I think historically, people have always, or employers have seen people on a one track, that's their role, they can't do it anymore. It's unfortunate, but that there are processes to follow. Actually, the Rentokil case is about taking a more open-minded approach, to use that word. Another consideration, of course, for employers will be properly documenting and thinking about those processes, not jumping to conclusions. And I think what we'd always like to encourage employers to do is, before they do jump to determinations around termination and more substantive decisions, is to think about what else they could be doing. Even though an employee, as I said earlier, might not request something, what else could they be doing? Because they know the business well, and they understand where someone else might be able to fit in.
Yeah, no. And it's such a rich area, and we've only really been able to just scratch the surface on this. But I understand that we're hosting a webinar and that we're going to express and explore some of these issues in a bit more detail. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. So we're going to do a 30-minute webinar on the 29th of April, and that's going to be designed specifically for HR professionals who want a deeper, more practical understanding of, as you say, what is a very, very rich area, very case specific, and requires just that little bit of thought about some of these areas that might not always have a black and white answer.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And what can attendees expect when they will, and what they might take away from the session?
Yeah, so we've got a lot more time than today. So we're gonna take a bit more of a comprehensive look at that legal framework, what the law actually says, and we're going to work through some examples, realistic examples that we see often. And we're also going to look at that guidance that I mentioned from the HRC, which is genuinely practical and useful. We're going to look at the Rentokil case in a little bit more detail. We've teased a little bit about that today, but it is an important case. And ultimately, we want people to take away from that they feel comfortable understanding when the duty arises, what is reasonable, because we've not really talked about that, but the different contexts will be really important there. Managing requests, because employees do have to make formal requests, even though they don't have to. And really give people a sense of confidence in dealing with those. And crucially, there's an opportunity for people to ask questions, which often people will say, I've just had this request, or this has come up, or I wasn't sure if this was reasonable. So there's a space for that as well.
Oh, good. And it sounds like it will be such a valuable session for those who are involved in employee relations or people management just in general.
Absolutely. And we want to see as many people there as possible, because this is a complex area, but it is something that people are having to deal with on a regular basis.
Well, before we finish today, Sam, is it okay if you just leave us with a few key takeaways for HR professionals?
Sure. So I think I'd highlight really 4 main points about reasonable adjustments. The first is, as I said earlier, this is a proactive duty. Employers, once they know or ought to know about a disability, they need to be thinking about adjustments they can put in place. It applies across the whole employment life cycle. So from recruitment all the way to dismissal, the obligation to be making adjustments is there. Thirdly, reasonableness is very context specific. So there isn't, like other areas, a list that you can go down and tick off and say, it's this, therefore it's unreasonable, it's this, therefore it's reasonable. It is very context specific, and so we need to take into account effectiveness of adjustments, but ultimately business resource, size and scale will also be taken into account. And finally, touching on that case that we mentioned, redeployment may be a sort of option that's at the end of what you might consider the usual employment duty. So that's something to be thinking about as well.
That's really great, fantastic. And thank you so much again for your time today, Sam. And as we mentioned, if you'd like to join us, we're going to have a 30-minute webinar on the 29th of April. So please be sure to look out for our registration details or do get in touch to reserve your place.
Thanks, Marcia. We'll look forward to seeing lots of you there.
Thank you everyone for watching our Sofa Sessions. We hope that you found this very useful and we'll see you on the next one.